Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by Checkmarks. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into our conversation today, I have just a couple of notes to review with everyone. First of all, we are recording our session today. So if you miss any of our conversation, if you'd like to listen in again, or if you'd like to share this with the rest of your team, we'll be sure to send you an email with a link to access this recording on demand. Now, if you'd like to get involved in our live conversation, there are a couple of ways to do so. Your first option is to use the chat tab. And whenever you find that chat tab on the right side of your screen, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining from today. It looks like we've already got a global audience, so welcome everyone. Now, if you have specific questions, we do want to touch on those throughout the program, so please do send them in as you have them, and we'll do our best to mix them into our conversation. Your best bet at getting your question viewed and addressed on screen is to send it into that Q&A tab. So please do send your questions to the Q&A and we'll address them as we see fit. And finally, we will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees today to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So ways to show your engagement are to send in chats, to send in questions, and to fill out our survey that is in the handouts, and I'll post it again in the chat towards the top of the hour. So without further ado, let's dive right into our conversation. We'll be discussing securing modern application development, the CISOs and security team's perspective. Now we've got a big old panel today, and they consist of Sudharma Thikavarapu, Global Head of Product Security at Dell Technologies. We have David Sims, Staff Vice President of Security Technology Services at Elevance Health. We're also joined by Cindy Blake, CISSP and DevSecOps Market Advisor. We're joined by our very own Mitch Ashley, CTO here at Techstrong Group and Principal of Techstrong Research. And leading our conversation today is Amit Daniel, CMO at Checkmarks. So thank you so much to all of our panelists today. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us. Amit, I'm going to just pass it on over to you and let you dive right in today.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you all for attending and for our panelists for participating. Maybe before we start, diving into the questions, we'll do a short intro. So I'll start, Sudharma, maybe with you, if you can, a quick introduction to yourself so the audience will be able to know you.
Sure. Thanks, Amit. Hi, everyone. My name is Sudharma. I currently work at Dell Technologies, lead the product security organization. Had the pleasure of being in security for my entire career, starting as a software developer, now all the way leading the product security. A lot yet to be learned, I would say. It's always a good thing that you're learning every day, and happy to be part of this conversation with the esteemed colleagues of mine here.
Thanks, Sudharma. David?
I would classify myself as the other guy when compared to Sudharma. I actually started out working in IT doing business delivery from essentially from the desk side and moved into information security about 2 decades ago. I've worked to make things go all of my career, and I do that now. I've been a developer. I've been a desk side support person, infrastructure and network engineer as well. So I like to think I can be empathetic with folks throughout the life cycle. I work at Elevance Health. I run security technology services. We like to say that we're in, on, or around everything Elevance Health does on the internet. Thank you. Back to you, Amit.
Thank you, David. Cindy?
Hi there. So I started my security career at HP with Fortify, focused on application security from the security person's perspective, and then took that knowledge over to GitLab and helped apply the application security to the dev experience, and then went to a startup called Firefly, bringing security into the operations and cloud side of things. So kind of the full gamut in terms of perspectives there. Currently taking a little bit of a break to help my mom through some health challenges, but wanted to stay involved and bring that diverse perspective.
Thank you, Sydney. Mitch?
Thank you. Mitch Ashley. I run the Techstrong research analyst business with Techstrong and also a CTO for the company. My background is software developer, primarily of business applications and also SaaS applications, internet services, and some network and security services, and also began work on security in the early 2000s. Today, I focus on DevSecOps, cybersecurity, DevOps, software supply chain, of all things that are at the heart of, I think, a lot of our conversation today. So I look forward. What a great panel you've assembled here too.
Indeed,
It's a pleasure to be
very
with you.
diversified and different backgrounds, so I'm sure it will be interesting. So let's just jump in and start with the first question. So I think it would be great, if we can start with a big picture. And if any one of you, and feel free who wants to start, can look at the 3 big challenges that you face today that require, you and your organizations to secure modern application development. So who wants to start with this one?
I can go
Okay.
first. So I have a different perspective. I like to go back to the fundamentals of security here. For me, the 3 biggest challenges, I would say, I think it's not the challenge. I think it's having a consistent behavior in any size of an organization is building this culture across the company for security. That's foremost thing. And most importantly, we have to make sure that the architecture and the development and the security are cohesively working together to build this behavior of security being intrinsic to everything that we build. And the second one is, how do we securely enable the technologies, including the most emerging technologies of AI? We talk about just performing application security, but things have changed, evolved over the period of time. And it is most important for us to really understand how can we securely deploy the complete stack of what is required to run an application. And the third and most important is contextualizing it to the business. So we can, as a security professional myself, and I've been an architect, I've been an engineer, we tend to easily forget that how much business is handling, how much the development teams are handling within themselves to bring the product out of the gate, right? So security needs to be contextualized to the business and not giving them a huge list of documents or requirements, and contextualize it to the business case, to the asset type, to the criticality, to the threat attack surface, and reduce the pain. And most importantly, get away from documentation, codify everything. I think is the key as we get into the emerging tech, especially with the generative AI and everything.
Great. Thanks to Dharma. David? You're on mute.
It's not even Monday, darn it. So Dharma, you've nailed it. I have to agree with everything you've said. I'd add just a few other things. The thing that we have to be aware of as information security professionals is that we're here for a purpose. We're here to secure the business's ability to do business. And so that makes us not just a security function, but a safety function. I like to paint the picture of safety to my partners in development and infrastructure. We're here to assure the safety of the organization, the safety of all of our livelihoods. And so we work really hard to be partners to help our organization take smart risk and to improve the quality of those applications. The other thing that I'd add here is that we have to be able to make sense of it all, right? Because we're out here innovating at the edge of technology. We're doing all kinds of wonderful things, and it's happening faster and faster and faster. And meanwhile, many organizations still have middleware or mainframes or other technology that may have been around for 20 to 30 years. And so that line between those is getting longer and longer. We absolutely have to build security into the new stuff. We still need to make sure we're taking care of the old stuff.
Thanks, David.
I think those lines are blurring quite a bit. We used to have application code and infrastructure, and the two were pretty distinct from one another. And those lines are really blurring as more things become handled as infrastructure as code. And you've got to consider that whole environment. So not just looking at what the dev side is doing around application security, but also the operations side. You've got a lot more that's defined of your infrastructure that's defined as code, and understanding the configurations and how to protect those configurations as the cloud changes continuously.
Yeah, we'll touch that very soon, and the impact on application security. Mitch, your view?
Well, I think everyone's had a really great perspective on this. I think of it both as from a software team and also from a security team perspective. And I think in many ways, software teams have kind of thought about security like we used to think about it in the security organization, which is kind of the vertical silos of security, right? What we do across our data protection, intrusion prevention, whatever it might be in the categories. We've learned that's not a great approach to be able to survive and protect our businesses and operate today. The same thing's kind of happened on software, where we thought about DevSecOps as let's shift left, or let's have the developers do that, and those do security, and those are all worthy activities. But I think this conversation represents one of the shifts, which is how do we think end to end about application security from development through running in production, but also how do we secure the environment that all the software is being created within, and the sources that are being used to create software, and bring to bear our wonderful security skills with our software skills and DevOps and tool skills and platform engineering, and really think about it more holistically, not to boil the ocean, but to really think about, let's systemically create environments where we can create secure software and then address issues as they occur.
Great. Okay, so I think we can start drilling down and get some more detailed questions. So, everybody were talking in the last, years or so about consolidation and the need to look at platform versus, point solutions. If you can present from your side some of the pressures that are driving you or your organization towards the consolidation, and when you're looking at, moving or shifting from point solutions to a platform, what basically are the main drivers or the main needs that you're looking for? David, you want to start?
Thanks. For me, it's really about matching our business's needs and matching our technologies to information technology. We are rapidly expanding across it feels like a 360-degree sphere. And so everywhere we go, every new rampart that we charge, we need to be able to do that safely. And we need to be able to do that. Point solutions are fine, but it's really hard to make sense of everything as you pull that information together. We need to be able to pull information together so that we can contextualize it, as Sudharma has said, and so that we can then begin to use it to make predictions. We can use information over time to help us to essentially see around corners with vulnerabilities, with application security code, even with infrastructure and configuration. We've had some early success with that here, and we're going to continue to do that. By bringing those information security systems closer together in a platform kind of status, we're certainly much better off. And Amit, I wanted to also mention that it's really not about one vendor of software technology. It's about thinking of the entire thing as an information security service bus, and that means that all of our vendors and partners have to play well together. They've got to help us with that integration layer and help us to make sense of these things.
Great, thanks, David. Mitch, your view?
Yeah, I think it's we've all lived in environments where we have no shortage of tools, and tools often go after a specific area. Well, as those tools mature, they tend to also venture into other domains, not just solve one problem. And pretty soon you quickly have a lot of overlap across those tools. So I think one of the reasons why platform approach to technology, even in the software world, whether it's for development or for security, one of the advantages of that is they're in their own isolated environment. They integrate with a lot of other things, but it gives you a place where you can consolidate data. You can begin to do analysis on that information. You can more orchestrate and coordinate activities and events and incidents as they occur, and start to fit into other workflows, like a development workflow, like a DevSecOps workflow, like a SecOps workflow. And really think about how you can automate it, because we're creating software and we're dealing with so many security things. at such high rates and volumes, we can't manually do most of those things. A lot of this we have to automate. Not that all the actions are automated, but we can't synthesize the data fast enough to respond.
Right. Sudharma?
Yeah, I think both David and Mitch kind of covered in a deeper perspective. I think there are areas where we need point-and-shoot solutions, right? There's no question about that. There are areas where we can see the convergence of multiple point-and-shoot solutions to become one platform. But from an industry perspective, we've always focused from point-and-shoot solutions to solve one specific problem. And the challenge with that is there is a huge operational overhead if you're using 3 or 4 different capabilities from 4 different vendors. So interoperability is nightmare, right? Because you don't talk to each other's systems. And we put in a lot of effort as an organization to really correlate this data, bring this data together, and how do we sanitize this data to make it more useful. And forget about automation, right? Automation is a layer on top of it. We're building so much of custom solutions in order for these 4 or 3 different point-and-shoot solutions to talk to each other. I wish there is a platform where we have a magic wand to do everything, and I don't think that's kind of a fancy world we live with yet. Hopefully, we'll see that soon. But for me, when we bring this one platform approach to solve the needs of multiple point-and-shoot solutions, what is more important is the effectiveness and the user experience. So the key component for adoption in any organization is the user experience and how well it integrates to the workflows that what Mitch was saying, to the developer experience, to different personas, right? We just focus on one persona, but think of it from a security perspective. We have multiple personas, actors within an organization. You have a development team. You have a security engineering and architecture team. You have incident response, who also requires the amount of information that is required. I think building this, contextualizing this platform to those personas is key to be able to solve all the problems that are required. And second is, what is always forgotten is the scalability of this one platform solutions and in a distributed environment. Right. My experience that I've seen it is there is a neat product platform out there, but it is not able to scale to the volume at which the companies want to use. And I think those architectural components of how this platform is built and what technology and how it could scale, I think is very, very key in decision making of choosing a one platform approach.
Great. Okay, so first of all, in order for the session to be interactive, I urge all of you, to just put questions. We'll stop the session. We will not continue and, answer it to have it much more, meaningful and insightful for you. So feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box to drop any questions, which takes me as a segue immediately to the next questions. Sudharma, you were talking about different personas. So it's not only the security, it's not only the CISO, you have the AppSec, you have architects, you have the developers, you have the DevSec. It's a team effort, which brings me really to one of the things that we keep hearing, in our discussions with customers and prospects, which is if you really want to have the best way to get your security teams adopted by the developer teams, usually, people are referring to it to DevSecOps, but it's really embracing. How do you enable? How do you make sure that everybody are on board with the AppSec program? So I would love to hear your views about what does it mean in practice on day-to-day activities? What are the requirements that you would like to have when you are deploying such solutions like we discussed on the platform and when you talk with your vendors? So how do you see that happening as part of the engagement of the entire team?
Yeah, for me, as I said, in my 3 biggest challenges, right, there's the madness to the cultural aspect of how you adopt security in any organization. Be it DevSecOps, be it in a normal fashion, I think embracing that culture of security should be must be intrinsic to everything that we do. So DevSecOps has caught a momentum because I personally think DevSecOps has given us the ability to showcase that we can integrate security into the pipelines in the build pipeline and being able to assess security very fastly. But we've passed that stage of DevSecOps to what Kathy was saying a while ago about how the thin line, Cindy was saying, sorry, Cindy, how the thin line between infrastructure and application is getting very, very thin, right? They're kind of getting into one emerged state, if for the lack of a better word here. So if we start thinking in that direction, how can we effectively, as we start deploying any kind of an infrastructure, how do we deploy it secure by default and secure by design? DevSecOps plays on top of the layer of the infrastructure piece. I think it's important for us to really push in that direction to gain more adoption and have more visibility into the end-to-end stack. There's less emphasis on asking developer teams to do this. There's more emphasis that we can bring natively secure by design and secure by default principles with more monitoring and observability into the state, because we a lot of you go talk to any organization, they complain about the toil that is required to embed security into everything that they do. And I think that we need to be more frictionless, move to the direction where we can build that security ingrained into everything.
Right.
I think there tends to be more friction when you look at point solutions and layer them on top of existing processes. I think what has to happen is the security role needs to become more of a consultant that focuses on the processes themselves to get at the root of how do you make a secure application, a secure infrastructure, and how do you make sure that it's protected and recoverable. And those things really get to the heart of how you develop your applications, how you secure your cloud, how you architect your cloud. And so I think the role has to change and evolve and not be just a separate layer on that has to integrate with everything.
Cindy, I couldn't agree more. Really, information security is an aspect of quality. And the way we know that is because quality applications don't disclose, right? They don't break. And so I've had the benefit of working with a lot of development teams. I've had, the Pareto distribution, the 20% good ones, the 20% bad ones, and so on. And so there is that security within the culture that builds into those 20% great. And so those really great organizations that are finding and fixing vulnerabilities fast, or releasing code multiple times a day, they're piling up wins. They're building really great applications that build really great customer engagement. And what happens with those teams is they typically wind up pleasing their customers better. They experience better uptime. The application itself is more high quality because they're more aware of it. And information security is a part of that quality story, not the gate that they have to get through. It's built in. It's part of that culture. On the other side of the coin is those application teams that still feel the toil, right? They still have to get through the gateway because the gateway has to exist, because if it wasn't there, they would ignore it, right? Now we've all experienced that in the industry. We know folks that are pro and against and things like that, but we know that those tools need to be there and easy to use. And then every opportunity we get, we need to make it easier for the developers to enjoy the benefits of the quality we can bring to them, the safety that we can help them build into those applications.
Exactly. Well, we got 2 questions, so I promised that we will stop and get them replied. So I'll read the first one and let me know who would like to answer Steve's questions. We all know the importance to update patches or upgrading time. However, the Log4j vulnerability was example of not updating patches on time to avoid the risk of granting hackers control. In that case, testing before applying patches in production will be critical, but resources to do so is almost always an issue for the security team. What is the best approach for the security team in this case? Who wants to give his advice? Yes, David.
That I think it's really it's a 2-factor thing. It's first, it's awareness, knowing where everywhere that Log4j is and then knowing where it's exposed and then how it's being exploited. By understanding, being fully aware of your organization and where those things are, you're able to prioritize, because let's face it, a Log4j detection on a system that's not even mounting that library isn't important, right? Yeah, we should fix it sometime when we get around to it, or we should remove the library. But a Log4j system on a publicly facing server, that's quite, or really publicly facing application, that's quite another thing. The other things that you can do is you can look at over-the-top controls like a web application firewall, right? You can use web application firewall to identify some of the more common attacks, and that will help direct your activities as well. The other side benefit of this is, as you become aware and you prioritize and you work closely with your infrastructure partners, they'll begin to appreciate that, because you're holding work away from them. You're no longer trying to boil the ocean.
Thank you, David. Mitch, you wanted to?
Yeah. If I could jump in, one of the points David made about quality being also security, and that builds in that repetition, is very true. I think also sort of counterintuitive, but the ability to increase velocity of how quickly we can deliver software also increases security. So think about the case of Log4j. I may not want to deploy 10 times into production a day. That may be so far from what we would do in our business. We're just not ready, or maybe even need to do that. But I'd like to be able to deploy a patch very quickly when I need to in an emergency situation, and have an automated test process, have the checks that I need to go before things go into production. You don't want to try to rush that when you're not really equipped to really know if you're ready to deploy it. So if you could deploy in minutes, hours, and within a day or so, your ability to deliver software quickly actually makes you more secure. So your incident response from a software perspective be much more effective.
Great, thanks, Mitch. Diana, don't worry, we see your questions on the chat. Don't worry if you can't put them on the Q&A. I'm sure Cody can assist, but I'll read the question that you give if somebody is able to cover it. Diana is asking, single platforms may not always support fit for all business functions. We have users engaged in swivel chair activities, yet for many organizations, they struggle with having appropriate staff and skills. For SMB, how do you suggest they approach this in the resourcing in-house and the external support services?
Can I jump in on this one too, Amit? I
Sure.
think one of the benefits of having a platform approach is it may not be the only product or tools that you use, but it gives you a common base of knowledge to work from for the functions that it does perform. So you're not learning 15 tools. You're learning one plus some others that are complementing or integrating with that. So there is a skills benefit to that. I think you also have to look at back to the persona and what the workflows are of what that platform is supporting. I had one of my trusted advisors, who's a software architect, told me one time, software people can tell when a security tool was built by security people, not by software people. And they don't like using those tools because they're hard to use, right? So it's all in the adoption of it too, and thinking about your platform. And Checkmark's a great example of that, thinking about SAST and DAST and all the forms of software decomposition, having it from a developer perspective, but also something that security engineers and staff understand well enough how that fits into the software lifecycle and meets the requirements of the things you want to be able to accomplish. That's super important.
Thank you. Thanks, Mitch. Okay, so we'll continue, and feel free to add more questions into the Q&A. So our next question is about an area that we keep hearing, about consolidation and a trend in the market in the shift to cloud-native application development that really changed, the entire approach to application security. So if our panelists can, share with us, what do you think about, securing applications from code to cloud? And also because we see a lot of talk coming about CNAPP and AppSec starting to overlap. And what is your view about that one? I mean, where do you think CNAPP and AppSec will be in like 3 to 5 years from now?
So I'll hit on the code to cloud, Amit, if I may. So code to cloud has been there, and many organizations has been practicing to consume public cloud more specifically for the last 1 decade or so. I remember my days in T-Mobile, 2012. I led the cloud security strategy for T-Mobile, and we had this vision of moving to cloud, public cloud, right, for scalability, for acceleration to the market and everything. Um, I think what is important from a security standpoint, in my opinion, is the consumption of public cloud services is much, much, much easier in the cloud environment when compared to your on-premise implementation and deployment. And at times we get the luxury to use the available services in the cloud with not even thinking about the consequences and the impact that we will have from a security standpoint, because you are more focused on getting a product out of the gate, right? That is more highest priority. And over the period, my experience is that, we lost the governance aspect of it, right? Because now your application teams have started consuming multiple services, and there are multiple subscriptions that are out there, and your threat attack surface has been constantly spreading. And how do you really focus and bring back things in order? So I don't know if I think we will dilute the importance of cloud security by using application security combined with comparing it with the cloud security, because it is much bigger problem in the cloud space. Even today, after having so many vendors come up with so many great ideas about how do we secure cloud environments. So most importantly, the supply chain attacks has been a lot more compared to the on-premise environments, and your infrastructure at times has been hacked, and the compute and storage is being used for other computational purposes in the cloud, and you're not knowing about it, and your application is sitting very next to it. Misconfigurations in cloud has dramatically increased. And in order to solve this, and I want to go back to what I said, right, to your question about DevSecOps adoption piece, there is a tendency to adopt security throughout the community of development. I think there's no question about that. How can we effectively provide the ability to really monitor any change in configuration, any drift in change in configuration? There needs to be a way to quickly identify it, detect it, prevent it, and notify it to the concerned personas so that there is a immediate action taken. And that's one aspect. And second is building this culture of reference architectural patterns is very important, because lack of understanding of how applications can be deployed in cloud and lack of having reference architectures creates much more problem than anything else. I think that's where I think there's lots of focus that needs to be put on to the code to cloud applications. And I think we're not going to turn back on it with generative AI. There's more emphasis on using public cloud environment, public LLMs that are being offered by OpenAI and all of these companies.
I'd like to add to what Siddharma said around configurations. 10 years ago, there used to, Fortify had a big vulnerability report, and failure to patch was always the top cause for malicious activity. I believe that configurations are going to take the place of failure to patch. That's the cloud native failure to patch, really, is not configuring properly or allowing your configuration to be open to change that's not governed. And if you think about some of the configurations, they're very important things like security groups and what's open to the public. And so when you think about protecting those, you need the ability to secure those, to understand if they're being changed, to roll back those configurations. There was a an attack last year on MGM, where their cloud, their applications were held ransom, cost them millions of dollars. It's a very interesting read. But what in the end they decided, it's a cloud application, I'm just going to start over, right? To David's point about it's harder to attack a moving target, but you know what? The cloud moves quickly because of those configurations and things. So understanding how to rebuild them quickly, it's a lot like if your Windows laptop, and I say Windows specifically because Microsoft does it better, but if your Windows laptop crashed and you had to do a factory restart, imagine all of the settings that you had that are gone, that you've got to recreate. Do you remember what they are? It's a lot of trial and error to get it back to where you wanted it. And I think that's what MGM discovered, was that those configurations are super important. So I just throw that out there because I think the security teams need to be aware of not only the pure application side, but the infrastructure as code and configurations and the side that typically has fallen into the operations realm, and embedding good practices right from the beginning is super important there.
I'd like to pick up there with Cindy and agree with both Cindy and Siddharma. These are very important things. And it's really about awareness. It's about understanding what's running in your environment, where it is, and then monitoring for drift with configuration, for example. One other thing that we really need to be aware of is APIs. There are applications that are generational apps. They've been around forever. And sometimes those API calls get missed, or those API publications get missed. And it's really important for us to look through our code, find those APIs, and monitor again at the perimeter to make sure that those things are working the way we expect them to. Many of the cloud-based attacks that I've read about recently began with an API, with misuse of an API. So it's really important that we know about all of the comings and goings, the emanations from our environment and to our environment. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have the number right on top of my head, Amit, but Akamai has something like 60 to 70% of their traffic. They measure our API calls coming across the network. So much more of our traffic isn't just surfing web pages. It's everything from RESTful calls to GraphQL and other kinds of API calls. I think to your question about where is AppSec headed and where is I can't remember. You said AppSec, and then you said, what was the other part you were asking about?
CNAP.
Oh,
CNAP.
CNAP. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, AppSec has kind of multiple definitions. One of them is, being able to find vulnerabilities and patch them quickly. It can be API security. It can be more of testing applications for security. CNAP is really addressing an architectural difference in approach to software with cloud native, which, interesting enough, for security professionals, network professionals, it looks very familiar when you kind of actually look at under the covers. All those microservices and containers and things like that are really talking to each other over API calls, network calls, and you're securing a kind of a fabric of functions. Courses that are designed that way. It could be distributed across locations, aka a network again. So a lot of the things that you think about in CNAP are about securing the infrastructure, securing Kubernetes. Some of the infrastructure software might be running on using API gateways, API identity between services. Those are all things that many security people, at least portions of, they already know. So I think my point is the more we can take this and look at it holistically, because it isn't just about APIs, it isn't just about vulnerabilities, it isn't just about Kubernetes security. It's really an end-to-end security perspective, because any one of those locations, whether it's an access control to a S3 bucket that's available and inappropriately, and access controls are out of whack, to a poorly designed or secured API, any of it is an attack vector today. And will continue to be.
Great. Well, we got a question that is exactly the question that I wanted the Access panel, to reply, which shows that we are fully aligned here. So, and the question is around clearly one of the strongest buzzwords out there that impacts our world, which is AI, that entered our scene. And it's really safe to say that it's completely disrupting, the development workflow. So it will be interesting to hear from each one of you. Where do you see the risks as well as the opportunities in impacting, development and security perspectives? And if you can give examples to what you are doing with that in your organizations, it will be fantastic. Who takes it?
I'll jump on.
Okay.
Well, first, I think it's a great question, and it's really nuanced, maybe even beyond what you're thinking here in the audience. There's a temptation to accept computer-generated code as gospel, as really great code, and it works. What I've found myself in my own studies, and what I found in detection, is that computer-generated code works, but it's also usually vulnerable and makes bad calls to it. We make mistakes with computer-generated code too, is the big thing. So as we look to AI-generated code, we know that the velocity of code is going to go up. We know that means that we need to be ready to scan at a high rate of speed to provide static applications assessment as fast as possible. In addition to that, we also need to be looking at AI as consumers. AI is going to become a reach extender first for all of us. And so as knowledge workers, we're going to need to be able to use probably multiple types of AI to help us to just reach further, do more. And that will help us to match velocity with our partners. In addition to that, AI is going to be a very significant attacker if it's not already, and I think it probably is. I also think that AI will be a very significant defender. We haven't seen a lot of that yet, but I think it's coming. So there's a really big box there, and we need to be aware of all of it.
Cindy, Sudharma, your thoughts?
So I would say, I think, as David said, my opinion is there's a lot to unpack with generative AI. We are just scratching the surface here, thinking about, at an application layer, what are the attack surfaces, right? But fundamentally, you need to understand the entirety of the stack, how AI is being offered to you as a service. So the way that I look at it is there's a public offering, there's a private offering. The public offering is something like, think of it, a public cloud on steroids. There's so much of unknown in the public offering. You take an OpenAI LLM and use it the way you wanted it. They expose your APIs, you pay for the token consumption, and you use it, which is great. But how do you know that these models are trained with the right set of data? How do you know that nation-state actors are not poisoning the data and the models and all of that? So that's a different set of issues that we would look at it. And I know we tend to lean towards Copilot and the code generation, which falls under AppSec, which is rightly to say that it's important. But what is also more important is to understanding how these models are generating that code and what basis they are being generating the code and what kind of data is being used to generate the code. But when there is a private offering where you as an organization has enough resources to really build a model, train a model with your own data sets and everything, there's more aspects of understanding the data version control is key, which we don't even think about it, what kind of data is being used. Data sovereignty is key because you can't use the data that is produced in European world and elsewhere because of the GDPR constraints and everything. So there are multiple rules and regulations that come into play in order for us to consider. So I 100% agree that the attack surface is completely different in how we consume these models versus how we use them to protect against bad actors and how bad actors are using these models to make attacks more simpler, right? So I think we are just scratching the surface, in my opinion. There's a lot to be learned. And one thing that I tell myself constantly is that don't just focus on one layer of security in the AI because you need to understand every layer of how this entire stack is being built and how do we deliver value from a security standpoint to the stack.
I can add into it's a big topic, right? There's multiple ways to look at this, from how attackers might leverage it, how we might use it to defend, how it fits into our security fabric, security tools. I think an under-discussed area to pay more attention to is we have a lot of experience with AI and ML and applications and deploying that as part of apps. At least enterprise organizations, many do, not everyone. Generative AI brings its own uniqueness with LLMs and small LLMs. But the real issue is how do all that flow into workflows across the organization, whether there's security or development or release or operations. And the thing about generative AI that's even maybe a little bit more unique than even ML and AI models is the data aspect that comes with training the LLM models and protecting data of what goes into or doesn't go into. There's things like retrieval augmented generation, which helps protect data that you want to be able to use as part of a model, but doesn't get trained or ingested into a model. How does that get protected? Because these things are evolving on its own path in parallel with applications and the technology that we're using as part of the deployment. So that model can be trained and updated on a much different frequency or velocity than maybe the application does. So I think that's a lot of areas for us to kind of develop our security chops around, of how do we help protect that part of how AI fits into our overall software vertical and horizontal fabric.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. I posted, by the way, we're running now a symposium for AI because it's a topic that many people, in the industry would like to learn from each other and to get better education about the risks as well as the potential in terms of opportunities. So we are hosting a really large symposium with different types of partners covering the entire security space, not only application security. If you're interested to learn, I dropped a link. You can feel free to register. It's a long one, but you can see the full agenda and jump in and out depending on the topics of your interest. Okay, let's see. I basically, from my side, covered all the questions. If there are additional questions from the audience, I would love to get them and so we can answer them. I don't see that there is another one that we missed there. Cody, anything from your side?
There is a question from Steve.
Go ahead, Cindy.
There's another question. I didn't, so maybe
from Steve in Q&A about credentials on the dark web and tools like deepfake. Maybe we've covered that, but I think he's asking about what approaches to mitigate security's identity risk. It becomes easier to fake people. You can do that now with images and with voice and all kinds of things. How do we deal with that as an industry? I don't have a good answer for that, by the way. But
well, even identity is evolving, both people as well as machine to machine, right? With ASCII for people and relying on more biometrics. I think this falls back into everything from your access controls of protection of data and your response to when something happens. I think most of us in security have learned the lesson that it's not all about defense. It's maybe 51% about response. And so the fact of the matter is, no matter what we do in defense, we will always have credentials of people in our systems on the dark web, period. It's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. We always have compromises that will happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when and how often, but it's actually more appropriate is what happens when we do have an incident and how do we respond to that. The same, I think, is true for identities for individuals as well as machine to machine. So that response activity, which goes back to, might require releasing some software, might require updating some configurations and some policies that are implemented either manually or through automation. So that ability to take the normal activities that we might do, but do that in an accelerated fashion in response to an incident is super important.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll add on something to what Mitch and Cindy mentioned here, right? I remember going back to my days of writing software, not knowingly building security products. Didn't know back then what kind of a software I was building, right? It happened to be, if I turn back and look at it, it was a soft security product. So back in the days of late 2000s, I would say, I was working in Singapore, and Singapore has passed a mandatory requirement for all internet-facing web banking applications to implement a two-factor authentication. And it was a monetary authority of Singapore mandate that pushed in. And I was working at Citigroup back then, responsible for 150 web applications, banking applications, and we had to roll out multi-factor authentication. So back in the day, we know that single factor authentication is not sufficient enough and it requires a multi-factor authentication. And we have to provide multiple options to the MAS, Monitoring Authority of Singapore, in terms of implementing two-factor authentication. One is the, if I remember correctly, challenge response with the safe code tokens or RSA tokens we had. Two was out of band, which is mobile phone SMS, which was they eliminated even as an option back then because you can't send SMS. They knew that somebody could spoof the SMS. And the third one was risk-based authentication, knowing where the context of the user, where the user is, and we have to implement that. I think it's more important to look at it from a perspective. I know we've come a long way from then to now. We must clearly understand that single factor authentication is not feasible anymore because of the way how phishing attacks happen these days. It's so easy to have a spear phishing attack, a social engineering attack, to gain your credentials and gain access to the environments. And we continuously see the pattern of breaches that happen. Is a third party's credentials are compromised or phishing attack and somebody gains access. So as Mitch said, we will continue to see the rise, and it's more important that we put in a defensive layers of security, being able to identify, detect, and prevent and protect ourselves. Yeah, that was my story. I still remember the way that we were being pushed for a multi-factor authentication implementation back then.
You seem to have survived it pretty well there.
Yeah, that's why I said, it was pleasure being in this industry. Nobody kicked me out yet.
I would say a lot of those same fundamentals are with us right now and today. And so actually multi-factor authentication is one of the best ways to combat resource abuse or identity abuse. The other really effective way of combating identity abuse is user training. And it doesn't need to be a half-hour module that you sit in front of your computer and click through. It could just be a prompt on a login that advises a user that maybe they've been compromised, that advises a user that there's a dark web detection, or that multi-factor authentication has been proven this much more effective. Would you like to use it? Right? There are a lot of ways that we can help our users be better equipped. We can make the complex a lot more relatable to those folks by just reaching out, right? We certainly design technology, we design response, we do all of those things that we simply must. But then also there's a human aspect we want to take up as well, and make sure that our partners, our friends, are all advised of these risks too.
Great insights. Well, I think before I'm sending it back to Cody, I want to really thank all the panelists for the insights and sharing your experiences from the field. So I want to thank each one of you for this one. And I see that Cody asked you if you can spend a few seconds to fill out the survey. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for the audiences. And we'll be following up. And if there are additional questions, feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to assist.
Awesome. Well, Amit, thank you so much for leading our conversation today. And to the rest of our panelists, thank you so much for spending your time here with us at Techstrong Learning. It's been such a pleasure to hear from all of you over the past hour. So thank you so much for being here.
Likewise,
Thank you.
Cody and Amit. Thank you.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure being here. Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Of course. So before I release our audience, a couple of final notes. Today's session was recorded and we'll be sure to send it to you via email, but you can also find it on the Security Boulevard website. That's securityboulevard.com/webinars. I'll remind everyone of our $50 Amazon gift card giveaway. So thank you for your chats and questions. Now, if you'd fill out that survey for us, it's in the handouts as well as pinned to the top of your chat. That'll also make you eligible for our giveaway, and we'd really appreciate your feedback from today's session. I'd like to thank Checkmarks for sponsoring our program, and to everyone here with me, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.